Okay, we'll make a start now. Yeah, I hope you've all had plenty of caffeine because you're going to have to listen to me until lunchtime. Right? So yesterday, we spoke mainly about the things you need to do to prepare Horizon proposals and some of the management things that you put in the proposal and the issues to consider when you're running the project. But today we're going to be talking more about the exploitation of the research results and to give you an overview of some of the practicalities that you may need to consider when you're actually exploiting the research results. Now, in your proposal, as I said before, you only have 70 pages and you can't at the start really define a full exploitation plan, but you can probably get as far as talking about the strategy as far as, you know, you're going to license it, or it's a spin-out opportunity, or you're going to license in different fields of use. Maybe one SME partner will choose to exploit in one market sector or geographical region, or another SME might look after another sector. That's probably about as far as you can go, because you don't know at the beginning how convincing an argument or convincing a result you will have to move down. So what I'm going to be talking about more are some of the things that you might do when you get within the project and you start getting results and you start preparing your more detailed exploitation plan. So just a quick recap, and I apologize because I gather there were some people who weren't here yesterday. Yesterday, you know, the gist of it was trying to understand the landscape. So understand all the relevant things. The Commission tells you, you know, what the topics are and what the challenges are that you have to address, and then you have to understand the landscape. And we looked at various sources of that, and, you know, maybe using patent information as well, so that you are able to justify the objectives of your project, what you're planning to achieve, and how you're going to get there. And again, you gather the data, you understand the landscape, you get some strategic intelligence, you plan, and then you implement management structures and procedures so that really what you're after is capturing the results, capturing them, managing them, protecting them if necessary, and start to exploit them. But capturing it is really just the start. So what we're going to talk about today, first of all, I'm going to say a little bit about assessing the results. So as Alistair said, you know, how do you pick the winners? You know, how do you choose and decide what to do? And then I'll say a little bit about strategies and different business models. You know, why you would choose to license something rather than go for a spin-out, for example. So that sort of thing. And then towards the end, I'll go through a number of different case studies just to show you how different issues were addressed. And again, this is a little bit more downstream, but it might give you a flavour for the thinking that you need to do. Yes, now we'll just slightly digress. Gareth yesterday morning said that we were pretty high in the table of revenue. Yeah, so Brooks was fairly high. It was a few years ago, it was ranked number 7 for revenue from IP exploitation. And there are 100 universities in the UK, that was quite high, and I think it's now down to about 15, 17, something like that. But the reason I mention it, Alistair mentioned the £1 million coming from one patent, but a large portion of the rest of that income comes from some technology that hasn't got any formal IP protection. And the reason I'm mentioning it is yesterday I tried to differentiate between IP and IPR, because you can still exploit IP if it doesn't have formal protection. And this particular technology is actually protected by a confidentiality agreement. It's a biotech-related technology, but it's not protected by a patent. It's protected by confidentiality, and it generates an awful lot of money. So don't think that you can't exploit just because you haven't got a patent. So let's just get on to assessing. So again, some of the practical issues you need to think about is where along this road you're going to go. When you do your research, you start here, maybe you end up somewhere here, if it's a research and innovation action. And you have to decide, if your research result is so fantastic, you can put together a convincing, attractive proposition, then an investor might come in, or a company might agree to license it. In practice, what you find is that you start touting it around, and you find people saying, "Oh, I'm not sure. It's a good idea, but I want to see a prototype," or "I'm not convinced it'll scale up." So you generally find you have to sort of go along a little bit further and do proof of concept work, or develop a prototype, or do something till you get to the point where the investors or the company investing in productizing it shows some interest. So you have to think about that. And so as you go through, you'll get some feedback. So as I said before, the exploitation strategies are the what and the why, and how you're going to do it, and that depends on where you want to get to. So let's just start by saying a little bit about how you pick winners. And you can guess that, you can guess what the answer is going to be. Otherwise, we wouldn't be standing here. We'd all be rich. But who should judge? When you have a research result and you want to assess it, who do you ask about it? Do you ask the inventor his opinion? Particularly at some universities, the inventor might be a very, very important professor who knows his area, and he'll come to the tech transfer office and say, "Oh, this is the best thing since sliced bread. I know all about this area." Who are you? You're just the tech transfer person. You're not a specialist. But of course, it's his baby. And you have to, maybe you get to the stage where you've looked at it and you've done a patent search, and you have to go back and tell the professor that actually your baby's ugly. I don't. It's not very easy. So, but they can provide some useful input. Often you find if you talk to an accountant, they're just doing some financial stuff, very useful input. R&D, if you go and talk to other researchers who are in the area, they can provide useful input, but there's quite a lot of not invented here. And you find that quite a lot when you take a technology, a company showing interest, and you speak to the strategic guys, and they say, "Yeah, this is very interesting." And then they of course take it in and they go and give it to their technical specialists, and then the technical specialists say, "Oh, I could do that myself. It's very not invented here." So you have to be a bit careful about that. External consultants, consultants will tell you anything. They'll tell you what you want, won't they? And of course, consumers will say a bit more about that, because consumers only know what they can see. It's very difficult for them to, you go and ask a consumer, do you think a consumer would have told you they wanted Facebook? Or Snapchat? I can't understand Snapchat. Why you would send a picture which disappears after 10 seconds. So there are some things that are different. So there are a lot of people. You need input from all of them. And, the challenge of assessing future markets for new technologies, is to try to determine the demand for products that don't yet exist, and from customers who don't yet know about them. And I can give some sort of personal insight into this problem. In the 80s, I was working in the microcomputer industry down the road in research machines, and I was responsible for licensing and looking at new software and product and technologies. And mice were just coming on the scene. Apple had just produced its Apple with a mouse. Other people were thinking of mice, and there were big debates about one-button mouse, two-button mouse, three-button mice. And no one was really sure whether people even wanted mice, because you've only got two hands and you type. But why would you want that? So people were thinking about foot mice. And one April the 1st, Byte magazine, which is a big computer magazine, produced this big article on the ultimate solution, which was the QWERTY mouse. So a keyboard on rollers. And it was only an April Fool, but again, they got a lot of requests for it. It was but at that time, I had the job of predicting how many mice we wanted, because customers didn't really know if they wanted it, and so we had no idea. So it became, so we bought the mice in separately and we sold them separately as an add-on to the basic computer for those who wanted it. And at one stage, that was the largest profit line item for the whole company. You know, it moved on and mice started being bundled in, but you can't predict it because it's a future item. You've no idea what people want. So Niels Bohr said prediction is difficult, especially when it's about the future. They're very clever, these Nobel Prize winners. I mean, that's... And everyone makes mistakes. The phonograph is not of any commercial value. I'm sure you've heard some of these. Heavier than air flying machines, market for only 5 computers, which at that time was probably right. But the one I remember, again, was this one here. No reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. And that's about the time that... I remember that, personally, because that's about the time when I did my first spin-out, which was based on the research I was doing, and it used microcomputers. So we had Apple IIs and Commodore PETs, all those sort of things. And I sort of saw an opportunity for doing something with that. And the man in the suit from the NRDC came down and agreed, and he gave us some money. And so we set up, in the research center I was working in, we had a little incubator space, a little room with all these computers in. At the end of the corridor, I mean, I previously was working on I was doing fluid dynamic, numerical modeling, so we used supercomputers and big machines, and there was a DEC mini computer. And my little enterprise at the corner was rather, people jeered at it. They called it Toy Town because they just didn't think, this is rubbish, this isn't proper computing, this isn't real stuff, it's Toy Town. And I think that was the attitude there. They didn't see any reason. And of course things changed. DEC was soon bought by Compaq and so on. So,
just about Ken Olson's comment. I mean, I see your point, but the thing is that when you look at the scenario now, actually things are moving to the cloud. So your things are becoming less powerful.
Yes.
So probably we're going back to that.
I think we're going back away from personal computers back to mainframe type things. So you could keep going in a circle. But the point I'm making is you can't really, you don't really know, and you can only make the best guess at the time. And no one can see the future. I mean, with hindsight, I went down the right road, but I might not have done, and lots of people don't. And yet the benefits of hindsight, significant technologies are easily seen after the fact. Companies congratulated or castigated to decide to pursue them, ignore them, but rarely are they very clear at the outset. So, community type things, social networking applications, I don't think anyone could have predicted that. And Sony, Akito Morita, who invented the Walkman, when he was asked about market research, he said, well, I don't do market research. He said, our plan is to lead the public with new products rather than ask them what they want, because we know what's possible and they don't. So the key message, though, I think, is it's not about people. Sorry, it's not about technology. People don't buy technology. They buy goods and services that satisfy their needs and wants. So what you have to think about is understanding their needs and see if what you've got can satisfy some needs. Don't try and, sell them technology. And the needs is obvious. The wants is a slightly different thing because I don't really need an iPhone 5, but I want one. Do I want an iPhone 6? I don't know. But there's a want element. I could quite easily do what I want to do on something else. But, so it's a bit of both. And so the basic message is that trying to evaluate new technologies and markets will always be difficult. And it's a bit like investing in the stock exchange. It's the same sort of thing. You can't avoid the risks, and there are a lot of risks, a lot of failures. But what you can do is try and manage those risks. And that means doing due diligence and having a structured approach. It's exactly the same if you go to an investor and say, invest in my company, here's my investment portfolio. They will go away and they will do a lot of due diligence. They'll have procedures and structures, and they understand that they can't predict the future, but you can at least try and minimize it so you get a slightly higher hit rate. So that's the sort of thing that you need to think about. And structured due diligence. So, think about getting a checklist for the systematic assessment. And there are several areas that you need to think about. Obviously, the strength and the scope of the intellectual property, the nature of the technology. Is it fundamental? Is it incremental? Is it groundbreaking? Technology transfer issues, and I'll go through each of these a bit more. Technology transfer issues, for example, is the inventor on board? Can you put the inventor in front of an investor? There are a lot of issues there. Support issues. Will your technology, once it's transferred, need ongoing support? Commercial issues, the market, competitors, and then an analysis of the different market sectors. So the IPR assessment, for example, what you want to do is assess the strength and the scope of the intellectual property. You'll find, when I was working at BTG, we had patent attorneys working for the company. And because they were working for the company and were on a salary, when we'd be reviewing a technology, they'd give us honest advice like, if I do that, it's going to make the patent quite weak. It's going to make it narrow and easier for people to go around, or comments along those lines. If you go to a patent attorney, you have to be careful that they don't just say, I can get you a granted patent by taking out this claim and I'll take up that claim. And you end up with a patent which might be granted, but it may not be particularly strong. So you have to take a commercial view of that. So, beware of patent attorneys who give you a patent that actually doesn't do what it's meant to do. Right? So you need to sit on top of them and watch that. So you need to assess the opportunities to strengthen and broaden the patents. We took on a patent from an American inventor in the area of memory, a system for improving the capacity of memory chips. And this came from an American inventor. We assessed it and thought this was, a good idea. But he'd written the patent himself. And it wasn't particularly well written, and it wasn't as broad as it could have been. Now, fortunately, it hadn't yet been disclosed. So we were able to withdraw the patent before it's published, and our patent attorneys recrafted the patent based on their analysis of the market and what they wanted to cover. So we ended up with a much broader patent, or stronger patent. So, and that was eventually licensed to Hitachi. So, consider, sometimes you may wish to not file a patent or withdraw the patent after you've done some further research to provide more data or improve it. And that can often happen with early stage research results, because you can file it too early and then you find some improvement, and if you published it, then your improvement, your original patent might be cited against the improvement you want to submit. So try and think early on about the strength of the patent rather than just filing it. And then, of course, the usual thing is to look at barriers, freedom to use. If you think, does your potential licensee need to get a license from someone else for some background IP to license your product? And it may be that the company who owns that background IP won't make it available. So freedom for use. And of course, also ways of strengthening your offering by looking at other collaborators who have maybe patents in similar areas, just to make it a bit more of a marketable product.
Excuse me, can you just touched earlier on the protection by confidentiality.
Yeah.
Could you broaden that a little bit? Because it seems to me that obviously there's a risk associated with that presumably someone in those circumstances could then patent. So it must be a very difficult balance.
Yes, you have to assess, when you're doing the assessment of the protection. In this paper I was talking about, it was to do with a cell line. So, clever people produce these things, which it's just the particular way of, if you like, the recipe and the cell line. So that wasn't protectable by a patent. So when I talk about IP, I don't just mean patents. I mean, some of these things here refer to patents, but of course it's much wider than that. It could be know-how, and the thing about know-how is, if you're going to transfer the know-how, if there's know-how involved in the manufacturing process, for example, which is a key part of it, that sort of gets dispersed. Once you've transferred it, its value is reduced. But there are other things like, say, a recipe, or a Coca-Cola recipe, which can be, if you can keep it secret, then the knowledge doesn't disseminate.
So in connection with Horizon 2020, is there not an obligation to publish anyway? So how can that be?
Yeah, but there are caveats there for, there are caveats if it's commercially sensitive, yeah. So, okay, any else? Okay, technology assessment. Again, people often do the pattern searches and they look for something in that same area, but they don't. What you need to consider is other solutions to that problem, not other technologies that are the same. And as I said before, it's satisfying the needs and the wants. So the example I gave yesterday of the space pen and the pencil, what would people buy? You have to, is it a new technology area that no one's thought about? Is it something that no one's ever done before? And then how complete is your solution? Is it just a simulation in a laboratory, or do you have a physical prototype? Can you demonstrate that it can be scaled up to industrial production? And if so, how much development do you need, just to get an idea? Is it a big job? Because if it's a large amount, then when you go to the licensee, that might influence the offer to him, or the way that, maybe you have some stage payments, or you try and get him to spend some money. And again, standard regulatory issues. These are all things to do with the technology, which is different from the intellectual property. So knowledge transfer. Again, produce a checklist. I've only given you a few examples here. I mean, there are, I have a template with a much longer list, but it's trying to have a structured approach so that you cover everything, and then you can use it almost as a comparison. So if you're reviewing several technologies, you can maybe get a comparative view. So knowledge transfer, if the inventor is not willing or not prepared to get further involved, that might be a bit of a negative. If the inventor is prepared to get involved and support the licensee, or get involved in the spin-out, because you will almost certainly need him about when you're trying to talk to these people. You get a company, you might do your searching and you find a potential prospect, then you arrange a meeting, and you can only get so far as a commercial person. You, at some stage, need to call in the inventor to talk technical or talk in detail. So, are they up for it? And what about support after transfer? You license it. If you're able to transfer everything in one go, that's fine. But in most cases, there'll be further support needed afterwards, which you can. I think Tim spoke yesterday about the inventors getting consultancy revenue. So that could all be part of the, if you need it, maybe you build in some retainer for ongoing support and consultancy while they're building up expertise. And then, of course, you have to think about any other licensing restrictions and how easy it is to monitor the licensee and police infringers. Because the licensee is paying you money for the privilege of entering your protected space. And you're letting him come in so that he can play football in your field in that area. And if someone else comes in and starts kicking a ball around, he's relying on you, because he's giving you money, to go after these people and stop them. I wonder how many universities have actually taken anyone to court or issued strong letters. I think it's quite, I don't know any in the UK. I know a number who want to, but only when they've got a dead certain case, because the risk of entering litigation is quite a risk, and I don't think most academic or research institutions were getting there. So that comes down to having strong IP. But again, you have to consider, how do you police infringers? I'll just digress a bit, because I wasn't going to talk about it later, but the the monitoring of licensees should be an important part of any license agreement, having the ability to go in and audit. And the reason I say that is that a licensing transaction is unlike any other transaction, like a sale. When you buy something, you get the money straight away, or you get money. With a licensing, royalty-based scheme, you're dependent on the licensee being truthful. Well, I'm not saying that it's honest, but reporting sales, reporting the royalties to you. And that means they have to have systems in place that you're happy with, that accurately report the royalties. And experience shows that when people do royalty audits, in general, royalties are underreported. And they're not underreported deliberately. They're generally underreported because as time goes on, a patent lasts 20 years, so it can be several years. The particular line item changes its number, it moves into a different computer system, and things get lost. So, as I say, licensing is a totally different sort of transaction, and you need to take some sort of precautions. So that's a different issue. I've already spoken about this, inventor personality. How cooperative are they? Do they have commercial experience? Personality, reputation, and motivation. So it is quite an important part of the assessment, because without them you're lost. When we look at sort of commercial opportunity assessment, again the checklist can go on, that's the etc. here, but you want to try and get a good feel for the nature of the market. Is this a hot new technology in a new market? Is it some nanotube-based, carbon nanotube-based thing that's new, or is it just an incremental improvement in something? Or is it new gyroscope for steam engines? Is it new or not? Are there mature players in the market, or is it something new? Is it a new social media thing, or is it just a new type of phone? Is it a local market, or is it global? Where are the hotspots? Because that will influence where you protect. Can you segment it globally? Is it a market that you can address globally in one go? Maybe if it's internet-based, you can, but maybe something else, you need to have a local presence. Fields of use. Is the technology applicable in different fields of use? Computer vision technologies, for example. I think you saw some in the robotics lab yesterday. I mean, that computer vision, generic computer vision, can be used for games market. It can be used maybe for the medical sector, and the same technology might be applicable in security applications. And these are totally different market sectors. So maybe your strategy might be to address all of these separately. And the expertise may be in the game sector, for example, but that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities elsewhere. Again, the usual stuff: total market size, likely market share, royalty percentage estimates for licensing and things, just to get an idea of what it's worth. On royalty, a question was asked yesterday about percent royalties, and they do differ from market to market. As a rule of thumb, you have to try and look at the profit margin that's likely to come on the products that are using your technology, and that can give you some indication. If the industry has a very narrow margin, then maybe they don't want to give you a large percentage. In the software sector, the margins tend to be, in certain areas, quite large, so maybe you can go for a higher percentage. But it is all a bit, subject to negotiation. Royalty. Yeah. Okay, so just in summary then, it's always going to be difficult, but you do need a structured approach with some sort of due diligence to at least allow you to persuade your bosses that you've done some due diligence when you say, I want to invest in this, or I want to take this to the market. You can't avoid the risks, but you can try and manage them in some ways. So the answer at the end of the day is it's difficult, But you, again, it's like investing in the stock exchange. You just have to do some due diligence to convince your bosses. Okay, are there any questions on any of that? Yeah, hi.
In terms of the structure approach and due diligence allowing risks to be kind of reduced, is that something you would recommend putting in the risk management strategy of the Horizon 2020?
This is more an exploitation.
Yeah, but you have to have a risk management strategy.
Yeah,
so
I think
if you've got an exploitation strategy that has a risk, would having specifically mentioning things like due diligence and the structured approach,
Yes,
it mitigates a risk?
Yes, I think that's a mitigating action.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
No, but it's, you know, you don't need to go in that
be able to tell
detail.
academics something to put in that bit.
Yes. Yes, but yeah, so it's yeah, that's the project risk you're talking about. And there are systems around. I have one with a lot more sheets, and I think Brooks uses a version of that, and I think other universities have similar things. So I'm sure you've got stuff. Are there any other questions on predicting the future? No, okay, right. So what I wanted to talk now is more about some of the strategies. This is, you know, everything is case by case. But, you know, we had this diagram before, and we've now sort of done this IP, a technical assessment, and now we're trying to think about exploitation strategies and how we're going to actually take it to market. Just one word, you know, research results are different from, say, fast-moving consumer goods or, you know, things like that, gadgets and products and things. They're very often early stage, and they're usually not market ready. So it's not as if I design a new cup for feeding babies. Things are common. I mean, that was a design. Mandy Haberman patented it. It was very useful, but it's sort of ready for market. It's different from research results, which are generally far from market. Sometimes those results are needs driven. Maybe in the case of Horizon, you know, you have the objectives and the challenges, so you can say, you know, they're satisfying a need. But often they're not. That doesn't mean that they're not protectable. Later on, when I talk about case studies, I'll mention the MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, and the core technology there for the nuclear magnetic resonance was quite far from the market. It was result of blue skies research in a physics lab. But that was the core for what eventually became the magnetic resonance imaging. And, you know, so it doesn't, you know, you could see the potential. Maybe you could still patent it. The other thing is that many research groups are working on the same leading edge. So your research result, you may be lucky and it might provide the total solution, but usually there are other groups and you've only got one little bit of the jigsaw. So sometimes it might make sense to think about working with others. And again, as I said, it's this technology readiness level. You have a research result. So maybe I've got this nuclear magnetic resonance thingy. If I can make, I may decide to go for a spin out, or I may decide to license it. It's very early stage down here, but I think it's a great invention. In practice, I try and put together some sort of proposition for a licensee or for an investor. And if I'm able to make the case, and it's that wonderful, you might find them taking you up on it. But in practice, it's not like that. They generally say it's too early, come back later, you know, prove it in the market, and so on. So you will almost always have to sort of move along here, depending on your technology, till you get to the point where someone bites. It's just, you have to just keep adding more worms on the fishing rod. And okay, just moving on now. So as I said before, intellectual property is a valuable asset. And you can trade it, and you can buy it, sell it, give it away. But unlike physical property, where you can have a straight transfer, there are many different ways of extracting value. And I showed this slide yesterday. So in addition to different models, there are many different skills that you need. And, not just sort of IP skills, but maybe if you get, maybe at some stage you'll need entrepreneurial management skills, which is different from standard management skills. Some people call it innovation management, but it's an environment where if it's a spin out for an early stage technology, then the management has to have a bit more of a risk-taking mentality. It's slightly different from, managing a fast-moving consumer good business. So, company formation, if you want to do that, access to finance. And the good news for most of you is that people should come to the technology transfer offices, because that's, that's often where the point of call. So, you need access to that, and therefore it's not straightforward for a researcher to do it on his own. One of the first things that you need to think about with your research result is, how can I build the best technology transfer package? How can I build the best offer? What's the best package? Can I improve it? Maybe I can find some partners to make it a little bit better. And bamboo bike. So I think you all saw this yesterday. It's been mentioned a couple of times. It was the result of, can't see, is Spent here? Can't see all James. No, the inventors were here earlier, but they've probably gone now. So this came about because the university was doing research in the Joining Technologies Institute to understand ways of dealing with sustainable materials. Sustainable engineering is a big thing, sustainability, and as a result of that, they were looking at bamboo, which is a very sustainable material, and a new method of joining bamboo was discovered. Most people just lash it together. It's widely used in Asia, but the technology wasn't as well understood as that of other materials. So as a result of that, they found a way of joining bamboo. I won't try. I don't think it'll work as a boomerang, so I won't do that. And of course, there are many different applications for joining bamboo. It's not just for the bike, but for furniture, for other things made of bamboo. But because the two inventors were biking enthusiasts, they decided to let's make a bicycle frame, which they did. So they developed a bicycle frame, and we thought this is interesting. I think there was a lot of market interest out there, and there seemed to be the opportunity to maybe license the bicycle frame, or if you like, which included the joining method. So we put together a package, and it included a license to the patent, so they could make the join. But it wasn't just that on its own. It included the design rights in the frame, and copyright in and some other components needed. Copyright in engineering drawings, manufacturing procedures and things. Know-how in the manufacturing techniques, so the way to do it. Marks, trademarks, other markings. So, we decided to put on there, insist the licensee said, designed at Oxford Brookes. Why not? Get a bit of publicity. And the training. So the package included a lot more than just the patent. I'll come back to this later in the case studies. What about building an offer by working with others? As I said, usually you only have one piece of the jigsaw. And to actually get something to market, you need to combine your research with others so that it actually unlocks the opportunity. Now, in the 80s, Hewlett-Packard were they produced instruments for scientific plotting of plots and scientific instruments, and they wanted a page printer. So they looked around and they found a technology from a company called Canon, who were in those days primarily interested in photography. And they'd produced this engine that did sort of page printing, a laser engine in their research, and they didn't see any use for it. So they licensed it to Hewlett-Packard. And Hewlett-Packard launched the first sort of laser printer in about 1984. And as I said, I was working at RM down the road here in computer manufacture, and this new printer came along, so I got one. and I had one by the side of my desk. And if you remember, in those days, we had daisy wheel printers. Some of you aren't old enough, but daisy wheel printers, typewriters, and the dot matrix printers, all very clumsy. And suddenly I was producing memos that had about 100 different fonts on them. It was great fun to write this, and it sort of revolutionized the use of printers for microcomputers. But still, Canon very soon saw the market opportunity and tried to enter the market, and they produced their own Canon laser printer. Looked exactly the same, had the same engine, but it was branded as Canon. But by then, Hewlett-Packard had established the brand. They'd done a lot of work, not just with selling the technology, but building the brand. And today, 30 years later, they're still the market leader for laser printers, based on technology from someone else. And I looked at the figures for the fourth quarter of 13. Hewlett-Packard shipped 12 million units, almost twice as much as the number 2 laser printer manufacturer. So it's done all on, so with hindsight, Canon might say something. But again, so look at what you need. Okay, the next thing maybe we ought to think about is what is the best exploitation route? I mentioned there are several: a sale, joint ventures. Doing further research is, of course, a possible exploitation route as far as Horizon is concerned. But I'm going to focus now just on the 2 common ones, which is, do I start a new company, do I spin out a company, or shall I license it? And I'll just talk about sale first, because it's very unusual that you would be able to sell a research result, because the sale is normally for granted patents or a technology that's sort of established. If you're very lucky, someone might buy something early, but generally it doesn't happen. And of course, for you, they're lower returns, and you have no further involvement. But the thing that people mainly look at is licensing or startups, spin-outs. They both have the same commercial objective, to get the technology to market, but they're different routes. And I suppose the first main question you have to ask is, who is in the best position to commercialize this technology? Does it need further development? Can you take it straight to market? Do you need to do trials? Are there regulatory issues? If it's a drug, then you have to spend hundreds of millions on clinical trials. So it's unlikely that you form a startup. Might be different if you've got a platform technology for drug development. That's different. But you have to look at, who's the best person to take it to market. Again, licensing, on the other hand, gives you a bit more flexibility, but it's basically granting someone the right to use your technology under certain agreed conditions. It's very flexible. I won't go into the details. The LES, Licensing Executive Society, which was mentioned yesterday, run regular courses on the fundamentals of licensing and advanced licensing, so you can go to those. I do one of the fundamentals courses for them, but I haven't done one for a while. But it's flexible because you can think about licensing different people in different territories. You can license exclusively or non-exclusively. You can even license by field of use. License one company for the games market, another company for the medical sector, and so on. Or you can even do a license for evaluation purposes only. So licensing gives a lot of options, but you're basically having to work with a partner who you're giving your baby to. And you rely on that licensee to nurture your baby and feed it and grow it so that it reaches the market. So it's a bit like marriage, really. You have to choose your partner well, because you're going to have to live with them for a long time. But of course, you can have different partners in different territories and different fields of use and things, or for evaluation only, or so it's or provided you could do a good job. Yeah. So right. So again, licensing relies on the licensee having the expertise and the resources to to take your technology to market. So you can address different fields and find the best person for different areas. But company formation means you have to acquire that resource. Okay? It means you have to acquire the expertise and the resource, and you probably only have a part of it in the inventor, that you probably have the technical resource, but you probably then have to find the entrepreneurial management and the finance. And you do need this critical mass of expertise, maybe manufacturing as well, administrative, etc. And you have to have a committed and enthusiastic team, because investors, a large part of their decision is in the team. It will be on the technology, but they're looking for the people. And resources, they can be quite high. So they're different reasons. And I've just put a couple of tables here to maybe as a checklist for some of the things you might want to consider, whether you want to license or start up or spin out or whatever you want to call it, company formation. If the market is established and there are established suppliers and markets in that area, maybe licensing is the best route, because you can go to someone who already knows the market, knows the customers, knows the area. If it's a new area, a new market with new suppliers, i.e. there's no one obvious, then perhaps you can think about forming a spin-out. Is it evolutionary or incremental, or is it a revolutionary or platform technology on which you can form a company that they'll license on? Does the IP fit a gap in someone's offering? Can you go to a company and say, I've got something that's going to make your product offering so much better, so it's a component part rather than a complete solution? Or can the IP on its own deliver a unique and independent business? If it's standalone, then maybe there's a business out of it. Is the IP a one-off invention just on its own, or has it got the potential to grow and to expand and build other things? Yes.
Yeah, just a question of the last one. If the IP is one-off standalone invention, most researchers don't actually stop with one. It kind of goes on. So are you suggesting that everyone should go for?
No, I'm just saying you just have to it's part of the decision making on what you want to do with the. Is the IP, is someone just designed a bike, or someone designed a joining method that can be licensed, or, if it's spin out, it may be a company we span out a long time ago was from research from Birmingham, which was an anti-allergy vaccine. But the technique it wasn't successful, but the basic technique was a platform for developing anti-allergy vaccines, and it could be applied to many other, so it was an allergy for one thing, but it had the potential for producing a pipeline of other products. So, the decision is something to help you make the decision. On the finance side, licensing, there's generally a low financial commitment. Whereas a spin-up, you will have to probably raise more capital, and there's probably more risk. You can form a spin-out, some technologies, if it's a software solution, you don't need a lot of capital. Maybe it can be done in-house, but you probably find you'll need to hire developers, salespeople. There'll still be costs, and you have to find that money from somewhere. License can have early returns. When I license, I can ask for down payments when they sign. I can ask for stage payments, milestone payments. As they progress, I can ask for minimum commitments. And so I can get some revenue early on. With a spin-out, the returns can take quite long, because everything is tied up in the company, and it's only when the company, there's a trade sale or it floats, has a public float, can you get your money back. So, but it may be a large amount, but there's more risk there. The licensee that you're working with may fund further R&D with the university. That quite often happens. You build a relationship, and you work together, and the researcher does a few things for the company and improves the product. With a startup, the company itself may need to finance further work, so it's more expense for the company. with a license, the inventors don't have no interest really in a commercial role. They don't want to become an entrepreneur. It may be with a startup that the inventors are interested in having some commercial role. I'm not biased either way. I mean, it just depends on the technology. And it's just some of the things that you need to consider. Just on financing, this again is more of a checklist, and you probably know all this already, but you know, there are three main stages of financing. The first one is financing the technologies to make it ready. And invariably, your early stage research result, you know, everyone knows about this gap, you know, the gap funding. So, you know, you'll need to find maybe some funding from somewhere to build a prototype or validate the concept. And then if you're going for a startup, you'll need financing for that to build a company. And then later on, you'll need further financing, probably to avoid overtrading if the company's doing well, or it's a product-based company. But you need finance to grow the company, and then so the investors can exit. And again, it's about risk-reward. And, you know, the investment, you know, giving you the money just depends on the availability of the money and the motives of the investor and how good a case you can make. So in many universities have proof of concept funds, seed funds. The motives there are the university to try and further the development. The government provides money. The SME instruments in Horizon 2020, the early stage instruments can be used for, you know, for this early stage proof of concept work. As you get nearer to market, then hopefully the investment risk becomes less than if it's very early stage. So if you can make a convincing case and there's still a big risk, then I think the investor will probably want a larger percentage. If the university spends 50k to do a proof of concept or validation of scale up, then it's in a much stronger negotiating position. The risk is less. And so, you know, the objectives here, you know, the early market research, make investment ready, proof of concepts, prototypes. You know, you can get your money from your friends and families, the university, business angels sometimes get involved if it's in their area. But the European Commission has these SME instruments. And if you haven't looked at them, they're worth looking at because that will include things like market research, very early stage. I think it's about 50k for the first round. And then it goes up to the second and third stage as you go along that route. And then just, you know, when you start up, most institutions, most of you will have access to venture capitalists and business angels for the startup phases. And then it moves on really to venture funds as the company starts growing. And then furthermore, you know, to grow it really and then to exit. So you're talking about, you know, but you're probably, the company will be more involved in that rather than the institution. So just to summarize, I think as far as the exploitation strategies, you need to, of course, understand the market, understand the landscape, and you need to know how far you want to go. And then you need to look at building the most attractive offer. You know, have a look at what else is there. Can you partner with someone? Can you add value through further development? And then, of course, you have to choose the most appropriate routes and understand what funding will be needed. For the proposal stage, though, for a Horizon project, you really probably have an idea of the technology that you're going to produce, and you can assume, you know, you can make some decisions. Is this fundamental? Is it a platform? You know, and make some decision, have some idea about whether you want to go down the licensing route or the startup route. Later on, when the full exploitation plans towards the end of the project starts to appear, then you may have a better idea of what actually you've got, and then you can start to understand a bit more about, you know, how you can add value and where you really want to go. And you might have some feedback by then from your SME partners, your business partners, the market, and so on. And again, just repeat this, when you're doing all this, people don't buy technology, they buy goods and services that satisfy their needs and wants. So that, I think, is the key message. It's about people, not technology. So next I was going to talk about case studies, but are there any questions on that? Clear?
For the tool to be able to see the results, there used to be called this marketplace. Do you know if there will be another new tool?
Do you know anything about it?
Because it was simple to SMEs to just check sometimes the different IP results of
think,
European research.
There are quite a lot of these called shop window type, where people just post results. But I think in practice, in my experience anyway, no one ever responds to those. And that if you have a technology, you're better identifying who your potential targets are and being proactive and going for them. Because most companies, wouldn't have people sitting there looking through, I mean, some do. I mean, some Japanese companies have technology scouts, and they'll plough through this. But I don't know if there's going to be a course.
For Horizon 2020, there was Cortis, and there was also another website called Technology Market Technologies. Yeah, that. But for Horizon 2020,
There's the EEN database where people
But it's not so much MEN, but
Yeah,
there
so-
is not so much IP result from research projects.
No, I mean, there. I don't know if they still go. I mean, things like Yet to Come. There are companies trying to showcase technologies, but and we tried a few. There's one called PatX or something, but get very few bites from that.
Yeah.
In most cases, if it's a research result, it's probably the market is probably international. And it's probably quite big, so you're probably able to identify the half dozen key targets that you want to approach, and then approach number 2 because they want to catch number 1. So I mean, but it's doing the sort of mass advertising is not always. For research results, I don't think it works particularly well. But there may be some.
You did refer to as the issue in framework projects, Horizon 2020, the issue of access rights of other partners to project IP, which need to be resolved because it technically makes it very difficult, maybe impossible, to grant someone an exclusive license to project IP.
Yeah.
And also there's any spin-outs, so it's something to bear in mind.
Yeah, I think the rules changed in Horizon. So obviously the partners need to agree access and usage rights. And I think if you're using it for commercial exploitation, then you can charge a fair and reasonable royalty fee. But it's a bit easier now. In the past, it was very difficult to grant exclusivity. Now I believe you just need to have the agreement of all the partners. So no longer do you need the Commission to sign it off. I think in the past, it was the Commission had to get involved. So it is possible, but you have to make a case. Who are the partners?
Are the partners that only have it for research use though?
Yeah, they can have it for
Yeah.
research use.
So they can have it for research use, but exploitation, for commercialisation, then nobody within the consortium has any rights
No.
to your results for use
Yes.
if they haven't been involved in the creation of that. Anyway, so that,
I thought
they've never had
had
that.
rights to it if they need it to exploit their own.
Well, then they have to agree.
Yes, only, yes, if they need your background requirement in order to exploit, but then that has always been
Yeah.
subject to special agreement between those two parties.
So it still means that you've got an external party that wants
A third party,
exclusive
yeah.
rights to this technology. You've got a bit of an encumbrance there.
Yeah, but then both parties would have to agree and jointly
Do
license, yeah.
something to sort it out.
Yeah, you have to sort it out, and the other partners need to agree as well. So,
Can I just on that one point, if you use the Commission's model contract, it's got quite a nice wording in there that anybody wanting to give an exclusive license to the IP that he or that he has to give 45 days notice to the other parties. It's not done on an approval basis. You have to give notice out, and others have to object within 45 days of that. Now that's a substantial improvement, as you mentioned, Eugene, over the existing situation where somebody in Brussels had to sign off on the deal.
Yeah.
But I don't, it's still a little bit of a hindrance to the commercial exploitation. But you have to accept, if you're taking Horizon 2020 money, at the end of the day, there's a quid pro quo to be paid for that, and that is giving the exploitation out. Maybe just comment on that one point. We'll talk a little bit more this afternoon, but you possibly, when you're thinking about some of these projects, you need to think about who are the potential commercialisation while in it, and possibly if you're going to get into such conflicts, you might even choose not to take one person into this.
Yeah, and there are some technologies which naturally people would want exclusive access to. I use drugs as an obvious one, and there are other cases where, because the market is small, it's a new technology and it's growing, you may decide you don't want to give non-exclusive licenses to lots of people because it'll fragment the market, and you may say it's actually commercially much better, let's support this one guy, because then the market, it's a small market, but we don't, we want him to have a fair chance. Otherwise, it's several people and none of them will make any money. So you have to, think of that. So there was another question somewhere?
So on what basis can they object?
There is, in the commission model contract, you can object. It doesn't say what, why, how you can object. It says you can object.
So they can unreasonably object?
Potentially they could unreasonably object. I would have thought, personally, it would be more along the lines of, I want to take compensation, I want to have some compensation. That's what the way it is. I say it's just a commission model contract. There's a fair degree of leeway to negotiate or put additional clauses into that particular thing. What the Commission's not going to allow you to do is to free exclusivity from day one.
Potentially it could block all exploitation, and then the Horizon 2020 is fine.
Yeah, I mean, in general, if they object, then you'd have to be some negotiation. And
well, in the consortium agreement, that's where you have the mediation clauses and the kind of conflict resolution in DESCA. It's exactly for that, because it cannot be unreasonably withheld. Permission cannot be unreasonably withheld because it's just.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Sorry, going on. Your arbitration and mediation clause that they put in using WIPO is absolutely superb. Anybody who's not tried to use the WIPO system in the future, I mean, people like doing London International Court or a Chamber of Commerce in Paris, but the Commission has picked up on the WIPO stuff, and you've got some excellent technical people in there, whereas at London International Commercial Arbitration Court, you've often just got jurists or lawyers who are trying to deal with it, whereas WIPO's really made an effort to get people with scientific backgrounds into it, which means you do actually get, exactly to the point you're making there, you get the mediation system, you can call them in to try and help mediate that at a very, very early stage.
but usually money helps.
Yes.
Any other questions?
The organisation that I work for is a research centre, and we work primarily with open source. So I'm not sure how we can. And so we do technology transfer. We work with a lot of companies, and more than 20% of our R&D funding comes from working with companies, with big companies. But that's our income. Our income is from working with these companies on open source software. So I don't know where we fit into the.
I mean, open source. People often say, open source versus patent. I mean, open source is just another license, and there are licenses attached to the open source. And just one of the conditions is you make the source code available. And there may be in certain other contracts other little viral clauses as well. And I've no objection to using open source, provided there's a reason for doing it. What I'd object to is an institution or someone saying we have an open source policy. And everything's going to be open source. I mean, open source serves a useful purpose, because it's a sort of community type model, and maybe you wish to build a community. So the best way of doing it is to make available the open source so you can benefit from that. But there's always an added value somewhere. and the added value you've mentioned. It's you know, the R&D that you get on the back of it, or the consultancy on the top of the open source model. It's a bit like the internet. The internet is open, but there's lots of ways of using it. So, you know, if I produce a platform for, say, a service level layer above, and I may decide that actually, in order to benefit from this service layer, then I'm going to make all that open. I'm going to get a community. They're all going to pick up on my approach, and we'll provide some added value services. We'll do training. We might provide product. We'll encourage added value resellers. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with open source, but it has to be there for a reason. You know, not a knee jerk just because people will say, oh, the Commission likes open source. You know, it doesn't. You know, if it's not commercially, or you know, if it's not justified. So, yeah.
I was wondering, perhaps make an educated guess, how big are the provisions that Commission allow for uncertainties resulting from the development of the IP in the process of development of the project itself, of collaborative project, within the Horizon framework?
What do you mean by uncertainties?
Because from the outset of the project, you cannot often estimate the entire scope of IP rights or uncertainties in IP rights resulting in the process of development of the project.
Well, I think they understand that. It's a research project. But I think they'd like you to justify what you're claiming to do. So the decision to fund is based on you providing some evidence to convince the evaluators that this is a sensible proposal. You know, if I say I'm going to design the objective is to get to the moon, and so my proposal says I'm going to build a bamboo bike to go to the moon, you know, maybe the evaluators won't think that's a good idea. And if, you know, I mean, I think, you know, you have to provide convincing evidence in the proposal, and I think people recognise that it doesn't always work. Is it?
No, but I mean, at the start of the project, the IP rights may reside with one company, let's say, or one inventor, or one higher education institution, or whatever. But in the process of development, there might be new IP rights developed, and they will be spread across the consortium. And you're supposed to make the provisions for this from the outset, but you may not, because you don't know what results.
No, but the rules are clear in that whoever creates the IP owns it, and if there are several people contributed to the invention, then it's jointly owned. And then there should be provision in the consortium agreement for you to have a process to work out what the relative contributions are, and a mediation system if people can't agree. But generally people do agree, you know, it's 70-30 or 30-30-40, and then, you know, so that provision is there. And that's the foreground. The background IP is identified beforehand, and it belongs to the partner who owns it. And the new IP, you have to have procedures in place to capture it and deal with that.
I think if you have a plan and you have a strategy, and then because of the nature of the research, it kind of doesn't pan out how you wanted it to, the thing to bear in mind is the Commission wants the dissemination and exploitation of your research, and that can be by just going, do you know what, we're all in it together, here everybody, just use it. That's fine, because it will be being used, and there's an impact, and there is, you know, exploitation doesn't have to be for money in terms of the research outputs. All you do is you keep your project officer informed, you know, when you report in your midterm. You know, one of the things will be, it's coming in a slightly different way, therefore the exploitation strategy is likely to change, because now it seems like just opening the doors and allowing the whole world to use it is the best way to make sure that the technology it gets out there. And as long as you do that, there's no issue. They're not going to go, well, you said that a year and a half ago, so now we're not going to fund you anymore. That's not how it works.
So exploitation, as we said yesterday, it's probably the wrong word. You know, it means the use. It should be the use of the IP, which could be commercial use or non-commercial use. And, we get a bit confused. I'm using exploitation here, and it's got a commercial sense in it, and research results are not always ready for the market, but, a university can have an exploitation plan for the reuse of that technology, so, yeah.
But my question is, you're saying commercial and non-commercial use. I mean, since I think bulk of the project, most of the project will be overseen by industries. So how much of the bulk of the projects probably will be managed by industries, I suppose.
No.
No.
I mean,
there might be an industrial partner.
Yeah.
Who has a particular interest in.
Well, I've been to the Excel calls.
But Excel is different. I mean, Excel is an industry. That's a joint technology initiative for.
Yeah, that is the joint technology issues are absolutely driven by industry. So the way to buy to your IP anyway, frankly, you don't even have to have the discussion because they'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, my question was, this commercial and non-commercial usage. Is there a weightage that the Commission will?
No, they're looking for impact and the use of the results. So if those results, if you produce a research result and you just put it on the shelf, that's not good. But I mean, so, the reuse of the result or plan for making it available or disseminating it so others can use it, or even if you have a plan for using it and building on it for other projects. So, that's all fine.
Yeah, could you comment on the type of costs, the IP costs that you can put into your sort of budget for the proposal? Does it include just basic original filings or PCT national phase filings? And also, if you don't quite kind of know how many patents or designs, whatever you're going to file, basically, can you add costs to your budget sort of later on? So I just want to know how can you,
to add later on. To add it later on, sorry. Yeah.
I think that you should forecast them within the budget at the beginning. And for any other costs occurred during the project, they were not budgeted. Sorry, I think it's going to be difficult, but yes, you should foresee all the costs of submitting IP applications.
Is that just fees to the national patent offices? What about patent attorney costs? Is that
yes, they're all eligible.
You can during the project, just during the project, all the costs.
That can be quite hard to forecast. Some of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put a higher number in.
And the thing is, if you don't spend it on that, you just transfer it to your travel budget. So, if you suddenly think, oh, actually, we don't need more meetings, but we're going to have to find another patent, then you can transfer between the budget headings. But the most important thing is you have to put something in there because it becomes more difficult to transfer to an empty budget. Do you know what I mean? Every project, you should just make your academics slap some IP protection, open access funding in there, just as a standard default on every project, because you just don't know.
Okay, I'll better move on, otherwise you'll miss lunch. I just want to finish by just going through a few case studies. Really just these are practical real-life case studies, just to show you how different strategies might be used and how you might actually get product to the market. So I've got 5 here. We'll see how we go on time. I mean, the first one's about, creating, the blockage was to do with market acceptance. So, how do you overcome that one? The second one is about, trying to unlock the market because you needed to do further development. That's one we mentioned earlier. Multiple exclusive licensing by field of use and why you might want to do that. Building a better offer, by collaborating with others and unblock the market, and then building a better offer and extend the earning life by maybe deciding to build a portfolio. Okay, so the first one then is about the bamboo bike. When the bike was built, there was a lot of market interest. Everyone said it was great, it rode well, it was taken to shows, and we had a potential licensee who wanted to sell it. But, the market research, you go and talk to the market, what What do you think if I asked you whether you'd buy a bamboo bike? What was your impression? That it...
Yeah, does it dissolve in rain?
Yeah, so it was, you know, people in Europe don't seem to understand that bamboo is a structural material. In the Far East, they use it for scaffolding, for everything, for bikes, you know. But in Europe, people think of bamboo as something you hold up tomato plants with. You know, it's not... so the perception and all the feedback was, is it safe? Is it structurally sound? You know, will it break if I go over a hole? So there was this market perception that it really actually wasn't very strong or robust. So we had to find a way of overcoming this. So we did two things. We took it through mountain bike safety certification to European standards. So this has got a European a SEN or BS 1476 mountain bike, which is the most stringent of the standards. The road bike isn't nearly as strong. So we got a test certificate. So it is and it's the only bike, the only bamboo bike. There are bikes sold around the world. You know, some you see lashed up in the Far East, others, you know, a bit better built from the States. But this is the only one that's actually got a European standard certificate. And the other thing we thought we'd do is send the inventors off on holiday. But the holiday, the bad news was that they have to cycle the Transalps mountain bike race, which was 640 kilometers and up and down 21,000 meters. And the two bikes, unfortunately, they're not here to take a bow, but they were here earlier. But they completed it, and both bikes performed really well. I don't think they came very near the front, but the bikes, you know, it was done. So, and this got a lot of publicity. You know, we had the BBC, and you know, it worked. And that sort of, if you like, changed the market perception. And in addition to that, there was a lot of engineering work because the bike was developed in the Joining Technology Institute, and there's a lot of work done in the stress lab, tables, reports. So there's a lot of technical backup material, and that really provided the evidence that helped change the perception. And the result was a license was taken and the bike was launched. There was a mountain bike team, which I think, a mountain bike racing team, I think, which actually gained a couple of podium places. So it performed very well. But, you know, that wouldn't have happened unless we'd done something to change perception. The other benefit, of course, is it gave Brooks a lot of publicity regarding its ability in the area of sustainable engineering. And that in itself is, if you like, impact. You know, so it's not just about, you don't make a lot of money out of selling bamboo bikes, but it raised the profile for other work in this sort of sustainable engineering area. So, does anyone know what that is? It's easier, yeah, so it's contact lens, which was easier than the other picture. So this is the story about the one-day disposable contact lenses. And these examples are examples from when I used to work at BTG, which managed all these technologies. So the technology is daily disposable contact lenses, and it was invented by two individuals in Scotland. They came up with a new manufacturing method for making contact lenses which were really cheap, so cheap you could throw them away. They tried to raise money to form their own spin-out company and weren't successful. And BTG ended up managing the patent for them. We also tried to license it and found no takers. It was too early. People weren't convinced that this little laboratory method of manufacturing contact lenses so cheaply could be scaled up. So we ended up having to invest money, not a lot, but I think it was about 50K, in building a pilot plant to demonstrate that it could be manufactured at industrial scale. And as a result of that, the original investors who were still wanting to go and form their company, they managed to raise venture funds in order to manufacture this lens. And they came back to us for a license. And we said, well, you know, we don't want to give you an exclusive license because you're only a startup. You know, there are other people out in the contact lens business. You know, so we'll give you an exclusive license for the UK only. And we gave them a license for that, and they were very successful. And the first contact lenses were available through Boots the Chemist, and the company was called Award. Meanwhile, we were looking for other licensees in other territories, and we licensed it to Bausch & Lomb, a very large multinational company, who also found it very successful. And then they decided they wanted an exclusive license, exclusive worldwide license, and because they were a large company and able to deal with it, we said yes. And they bought the company, and we granted them an exclusive license. And the company, so everyone was, everyone was very happy because the original inventors managed to have their company bought for a large sum of money. In fact, they carried on working with Bausch & Lomb, and Bausch & Lomb started this market. And that was one of the first adverts for one-day disposable contact lenses, which are now widely used. The lessons you sort of try and learn from that is that, you know, licensing in the early days failed because we weren't really able to demonstrate it would work at industrial level. The case couldn't be convincingly made at that stage. And again, the same, finance for startup was not easily coming because, again, people were skeptical. So investment was needed to just push it along a bit and to catalyze the whole process. And again, licensing by geographical area allowed, you know, the SME to quickly establish a market and allowed us to find other partners. It helped Bausch & Lomb make their decision because they could see that the product was successful in the UK. The other next example is to do with multiple exclusive licensing. Does anyone recognize this? Yes, Dolly. And I'll just put her there because she plays a part in this. This is the technology Factor 9. So Factor 9 is a treatment for haemophilia, so one of the blood defects. And this invention provides treatment for safe, non-plasma derived blood clotting agents. So previously, in the sort of early 90s, the only method of getting this was from human blood plasma. And in the US, I think the figure was something like 54% of haemophiliacs were HIV positive as a result of contaminated blood. So it was a big issue. This invention, by the way, came from Oxford. Or part of it came from Oxford. So at the same time, so we filed the Oxford University invention, but at the same time, there was another group in Washington who filed a US patent. They're both very similar. So these were, again, groups working at the leading edge. And so we contacted the team in Washington, and we decided to bring the two patents together to produce a stronger offer. So collaborating, not competing. Again, the market gets confused if you have too many people. So it was better to collaborate. And so the US group licensed BTG exclusively with sub-licensing rights. So basically, we were able to go and manage the marketing. Same sort of thing you might do in a collaborative project. Two people, it's who manages it, who gets it to market. So if two partners in a project each have complementary bits of technology, it probably doesn't make sense if they both go and try and do it separately. It makes sense for them to try and collaborate and one license to the other and one of them go out and try and commercialize it. So the Dolly the Sheep people, PPL Therapeutics, they were very keen, pushing very hard to have an exclusive worldwide license for this technology because they wanted to produce Factor 9 in transgenic sheep, Molly and Polly and Dolly, and that was their business. But we're a bit, they don't really want to give them exclusive rights. It's quite an important technology. So we decided to license by field of use. So they were granted a license for transgenic production, but Genetics Institute were granted a license for recombinant production, i.e. in the factory, and there were various other field of use licenses for gene therapy. I mean, the end result was that Genetics Institute launched the product in the USA in 1997. It's called Benefix, and then in Europe a couple of years later through Baxter Healthcare. And the other licensees, Dolly and Polly and Molly, and all their offspring and PPL Therapeutics didn't succeed. I'm not sure about the gene therapy, but the lesson really is that by looking at licensing by field of use, then you can spread the risks. Next case study is, what about collaborating? I've just given you an example of collaborating. This is another one, different sort of collaboration. Pre-1970, doing the cholesterol assay was quite dirty and smelly. And in 1971, UK researchers at the Institute of the Government Chemist came up with a new method of measuring cholesterol. And again, as I said, in many cases, research groups all looking at the same problem. Boehringer Mannheim filed patents pretty similar about the same time. And again, the market was confused. So, it didn't quite know what was going on, and cholesterol was suddenly starting to become quite important. So again, we decided to collaborate, but in a different sort of way, and not compete. So we both cross-licensed each other with the other's technology. So we both had a clear package for cholesterol assay, but we divided the market up geographically. So the different companies, Boehringer Mannheim, BTG, both targeted different geographical sectors. And of course, this was very successful, 80 plus licensees. Again, the strategy was multiple non-exclusive licenses. And of course, cholesterol, it took off and it was very successful. And again, the lesson is, unlock the market by collaborating. Try and deal with, what you're good at. Finally, this is the last one. This is magnetic resonance imaging. This again, the nuclear magnetic resonance, the technique, was discovered in 1946, and it was used for spectroscopic analysis. And then in 1973, Paul Lauterbach produced the first medical image, MRI image. By then, I think they decided to lose the N, because it was originally nuclear magnetic resonance, but they didn't like the word nuclear, so it became MRI. And then, again, other basic techniques for medical images were developed in a number of UK universities in Aberdeen, Oxford, Nottingham, and a number of others. And BTG was responsible for managing all these. Between 1704 and 80, a number of key inventions were produced. So these were patented by BTG. But of course, it was developing, and the strategic importance of bringing all the inventions together, not just from the UK, but from around the world, was recognized. So we built a portfolio. The other reason for doing that is that several new inventions kept coming up and improvements. The same groups were working in this area. And the early patents, of course, the patents only last 20 years. And the technology still hadn't reached the surrounding technology. You still weren't able to get it to market. And it was only as a result of Oxford Instruments here, is mentioned there yesterday. Oxford Instruments were able to produce this wide-bore high-field magnet, and that enabled practical MRI machines to be built. So it took some time from the initial invention through to having the infrastructure and the surrounding technology available that it could be manufactured and produced commercially. So that happened, and the first machines were manufactured in 83 and 85, and between 86 and 98, over 95% of the world's MRI industry was licensed by BTG. It was one of their big blockbuster revenue earners, along with cephalosporin and pyrethrin insecticides and maybe Benefix, and only a handful of blockbusters. BTG managed all up until about 1985, managed all the IP from UK government-funded research, and up until the mid-90s, it managed under contract most of the, for a lot of universities, while university tech transfer people. When I was there in the 90s, it had a portfolio of about 8,000 patents, and it had been going since 1948. And out of that, it probably had about 4 blockbusters. It had about 12 pretty good earners. It had about 50 not so bad earners. So the hit rate is not, it's not that great. So don't, just to stop you getting excited about maybe, So the point is the original patents filed in 74 expired in 1994, but the earning life is still continuing because the portfolio was created and it became the centre for MRI. So everyone who had an MRI invention basically wanted it to go into the portfolio because without it they weren't really able to commercialise. So BTG managed to build up a big portfolio, well over 300 patent families, and it's so the patent earning life was extended. So that really is the other lesson. Think about the longer term and maybe getting in patents from other competitors. So just a final summary, just in time for lunch. Again, I keep repeating this. They don't buy technology, they buy something which satisfies their needs and wants. Okay, are there any questions? Or are you too hungry? No.
Okay. Just one small question. Right? This when the contract lens, who actually funded them initially? After
I think it was their own individuals.
Oh,
yeah. But then, problems with patenting costs and things. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's the end of me. You can. There's lunch now and when do we get back to? Lunch. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.